Welcome back to our channel where we delve deeper into the life and crimes of one of America's most notorious serial killers, Jeffrey Dahmer. In the first part of this series, we explored Dahmer's early life and the gruesome details of his murders. In this second part, we will take a closer look at the process of his capture, trial, and ultimate demise. Jeffrey Dahmer's trial was one of the most sensationalized and highly publicized events of its time, and his story continues to captivate and horrify people around the world. Join us as we unravel the chilling conclusion to Dahmer's gruesome story. Capture. On July 22, 1991, Dahmer approached three men with an offer of $100 to come to his apartment for photos, beer, and company. One of the men, Tracy Edwards, accepted the offer and entered Dahmer's apartment. Inside, he noticed a foul odor and boxes of hydrochloric acid on the floor. Dahmer claimed he used it to clean bricks. After some conversation, Dahmer asked Edwards to turn his head and see his tropical fish, then put a handcuff on his wrist. After handcuffing Edwards in his apartment, Dahmer brandished a knife and told him he wanted to take pictures. Edwards tried to calm him down by unbuttoning his shirt and promising to allow him to take pictures if he removed the handcuffs and put away the knife. Dahmer ignored him and started rocking back and forth while chanting before turning his attention back to Edwards. Edwards tried to prevent Dahmer from attacking him by claiming to be his friend and wouldn't run away. He then asked if they could sit in the living room with air conditioning while they drank beer, which Dahmer agreed to. When Edwards needed to use the bathroom again, he waited for a moment of distraction before standing up. He noticed that Dahmer wasn't holding the handcuffs, so he punched him and ran out the front door. At 11:30 p.m., on July 22, Edwards flagged down two police officers at the corner of North 25th Street and showed them that he still had a handcuff attached to his wrist. He explained that a freak had placed the handcuffs on him and asked for their help in removing them. When the officer's handcuff keys didn't work, Edwards agreed to lead them to the apartment where he had spent the previous 5 hours before escaping. When the police and Edwards arrived at Dahmer's apartment, he admitted to placing the handcuffs on Edwards without explaining why. Edwards then told the officers that Dahmer had brandished a knife on him in the bedroom. One of the officers, Mueller, went to search for the key to the handcuffs, and Dahmer tried to retrieve it himself, but the other officer, Ralph, told him to back off. In the bedroom, Mueller found a large knife under the bed and an open drawer filled with Polaroid pictures. He recognized the decor from the pictures, indicating they were taken in the same apartment they were standing in. Mueller then went to the living room to show the pictures to his partner and said, "These are for real." When Mueller showed his partner the Polaroid pictures he found in the bedroom, Dahmer tried to resist arrest and fought with the officers. However, they managed to overpower him and handcuff him. They called for backup and a second squad car arrived. While pinned on the floor under Ralph, Dahmer turned his head towards the officers and said, "For what I did, I should be dead." During the search of Dahmer's apartment by the Milwaukee Police Department's Criminal Investigation Bureau, Dahmer's horrific crimes were uncovered. The chief medical examiner later described the search of his apartment as, "It was more like dismantling someone's museum than an actual crime scene." Confession. In July 1991, Dahmer was questioned by Detective Patrick Kennedy regarding the murders and evidence found in his apartment. Over the course of 2 weeks, Kennedy and Detective Dennis Murphy conducted over 60 hours of interviews with Dahmer, during which he waived his right to a lawyer and admitted to murdering 16 young men in Wisconsin since 1987 and one victim in Ohio in 1978. Dahmer stated that he wished to confess and put an end to the horror he had created. Dahmer revealed that he was completely swept along with his compulsion to kill and had an incessant and never-ending desire to be with someone, regardless of the cost. He specifically sought out good-looking victims, and his thoughts were consumed by these dark desires all day long. Indictment. On July 25, 1991, Dahmer was initially charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, but by August 22, he was charged with an additional 11 murders in Wisconsin. Investigators in Ohio uncovered hundreds of bone fragments in the woods behind the address where Dahmer confessed to killing his first victim. 2 molars and a vertebra were identified with X-ray records of Hicks, and on September 17, Dahmer was charged with Hicks's murder by Ohio authorities. Surprisingly, Dahmer was not charged with the attempted murder of Edwards or the murder of Twomey. The Milwaukee County District Attorney only brought charges where murder could be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, and there was no physical evidence of Twomey's murder, for which Dahmer had no memory. Despite this, on January 13, 1992, Dahmer pleaded guilty but insane to 15 counts of murder during a scheduled preliminary hearing. Trial. The trial began on January 30, 1992, in Milwaukee, where Dahmer faced 15 counts of first-degree murder before Judge Lawrence Graham. Interestingly, Dahmer had waived his rights to a trial to establish guilt, as defined in Wisconsin law, by pleading guilty on January 13. During the trial, attorneys debated whether Dahmer suffered from a mental or personality disorder. While the prosecution argued that any disorders did not deprive Dahmer of the ability to appreciate the criminality of his conduct or resist his impulses, the defense claimed that he suffered from a mental disease and was driven by obsessions and impulses that he could not control. In his trial, Dahmer's defense argued that he was insane due to his necrophilic drive. One defense expert, Fred Berlin, testified that Dahmer was unable to control his conduct at the time of the murders due to his necrophilia. Another expert witness for the defense, Judith Becker, diagnosed Dahmer as a necrophiliac, though he informed her he preferred comatose sexual partners to deceased ones most of the time. The final defense expert, forensic psychiatrist Carl Wallstrom, diagnosed Dahmer with necrophilia, borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, alcohol dependence, and a psychotic disorder. On February 8, the prosecution called Fred Fosdal as a witness. Fosdal testified that he believed Dahmer was not mentally ill or defective at the time of the murders. Fosdal described Dahmer as a calculated and cunning person who knew the difference between right and wrong, had the ability to control his actions, and was driven by lust that overpowered his morals. The second and final prosecution witness, forensic psychiatrist Park Dietz, testified on February 12. Dietz argued that Dahmer did not have any mental illness or defect at the time he committed the murders. He believed that Dahmer carefully planned each murder and went to great lengths to be alone with his victims. Although he acknowledged that acquiring a paraphilia was not a matter of personal choice, he argued that Dahmer's habit of becoming intoxicated prior to the murders showed that he was inhibited against killing and needed alcohol to overcome it. Dietz stated, if he had an impulse to kill or a compulsion to kill, he wouldn't have to drink alcohol to overcome it. Dietz noted that Dahmer strongly identified with the villains of The Exorcist III and Return of the Jedi, and that these movies had a significant impact on Dahmer's psyche and some of the murders he committed at the Oxford apartments. Dietz diagnosed Dahmer with substance use disorder, paraphilia, and schizotypal personality disorder. In court, forensic psychiatrist George Palermo and clinical psychologist Samuel Friedman testified independently of the prosecution or defense. Palermo stated that Dahmer's murders were a result of pent-up aggression and self-hatred towards his homosexual attraction to his victims. He concluded that Dahmer had a severe mixed personality disorder with various features, including antisocial, obsessive-compulsive, sadistic, fetishistic, borderline, and necrophilic. Clinical psychologist Samuel Friedman testified that Dahmer killed out of a longing for companionship and was not psychotic. He described Dahmer as an amiable, pleasant, courteous, handsome, and charming young man with a sense of humor. Friedman diagnosed Dahmer with a personality disorder not otherwise specified featuring borderline, obsessive-compulsive, and sadistic traits. Conviction. On February 15, Dahmer was ruled to be sane and not suffering from a mental disorder at the time of each of the 15 murders for which he was tried, although 2 of the 12 jurors signified their dissent. Dahmer's formal sentencing was postponed until February 17, where Dahmer read a statement prepared by himself and his defense, emphasizing that he had never desired freedom following his arrest, and that he wished for his own death. Dahmer stated that none of his murders had been motivated by hatred, that he understood the harm he had caused, and that his criminal behavior had been motivated by mental disorders. He added that although he understood that society would never forgive him, he hoped God would. Dahmer closed his statement with, "I know my time in prison will be terrible, but I deserve whatever I get because of what I have done. Thank you, Your Honor, and I am prepared for your sentence, which I know will be the maximum. I ask for no consideration." He then returned to his seat to await formal sentencing. Dahmer was then sentenced to life imprisonment plus 10 years upon the first 2 counts and life imprisonment plus 70 years for the remaining 13 counts. The death penalty was not an option for Judge Graham to consider at the penalty phase, as Wisconsin had abolished capital punishment in 1853. 3 months after his conviction in Milwaukee, Dahmer was extradited to Ohio to be tried for the murder of his first victim, Stephen Hicks. In a brief court hearing that lasted just 45 minutes, Dahmer pleaded guilty to the charges and was sentenced to a 16th term of life imprisonment on May 1, 1992. Imprisonment. After being sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of 15 people, Dahmer was transferred to the Columbia Correctional Institution. Initially, he was placed in solitary confinement due to concerns for his safety. During his first year of imprisonment, Dahmer received numerous letters from people around the world, with some sending him money to buy items like cassette recordings, stationery, cigarettes, and magazines. After 1 year in solitary confinement, he requested to be transferred to a less secure unit, where he was assigned a 2-hour daily work detail cleaning the toilet block. Later, his work detail expanded to include cleaning the prison gymnasium. In 1991, Dahmer had requested a copy of the Bible and gradually devoted himself to Christianity. He read creationist books from the Institute for Creation Research and became a born-again Christian. In May 1994, Dahmer was baptized by Roy Ratcliffe, a minister in the Church of Christ. Ratcliffe visited Dahmer on a weekly basis, and the two regularly discussed the prospect of death. Dahmer had questioned whether he was sinning against God by continuing to live. In a 1994 interview with Stone Phillips on Dateline NBC, Dahmer stated that, if a person doesn't think that there is a God to be accountable to, then what's the point of trying to modify your behavior to keep it within acceptable ranges? That's how I thought anyway. In July 1994, while sitting in the prison chapel after a weekly church service, a fellow inmate attempted to slash Dahmer's throat with a razor embedded in a toothbrush. Dahmer received superficial wounds and was not seriously injured. Despite this incident, Dahmer had long been ready to die and accepted any punishment he might endure in prison. Death. On November 28, 1994, Dahmer was attacked and killed in the bathrooms of the gym at the Columbia Correctional Institution. Dahmer was on a work detail with fellow inmates Jesse Anderson and Christopher Scarver when Scarver bludgeoned him to death with a metal bar. Anderson was also attacked with the same instrument and died 2 days later from his injuries. Scarver, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia, claimed that he was acting on God's orders and had not planned the attacks in advance. And that concludes our 2-part series on Jeffrey Dahmer. His crimes and their impact on his victims, their families, and the world at large will never be forgotten. We hope that by shedding light on his story, we can better understand the nature of evil and work towards preventing similar atrocities from happening in the future. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more true crime content.